A janitor whispers perfect Mandarin during a corporate pitch, startling the executives who never bothered to learn his name. Within hours, he's suspended. No explanation. Just silence. But when a Holocaust survivor posts "he saved my life," everything explodes. What secret did they try to bury? So dangerous they'd risk everything to erase it. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. In the heart of Midtown Manhattan, nestled between polished glass facades and marble lobbies, stood the headquarters of Landsberg and Rowe, a multi-billion-dollar branding firm that sold influence to the world's biggest names. Every inch of the office was curated, from the minimalist artwork on the walls to the hushed tones of power echoing through the 42nd floor. Executives in tailored suits moved like clockwork, gliding past each other with precision. Time was currency, and hierarchy was gospel. And beneath it all, moving through the corridors like a shadow, was Miles Carter, mop in hand, name barely remembered, face rarely seen. He was the overnight janitor, though lately they'd bumped his shift into early mornings to cut costs, a change no one bothered to ask him about. Miles was 47, tall, lean, with eyes that held stories most people never paused long enough to notice. He walked with quiet purpose, the kind that comes from having had something and losing it. Twice a day, 5 days a week, he cleaned conference rooms where marketing directors argued over fonts, swept under desks that cost more than his monthly rent, and emptied trash bins filled with lunch receipts, corporate secrets, and remnants of lives far removed from his own. To most, he was just the help. A uniform, a background figure whose silence made others comfortable. But Miles listened. And more importantly, he understood, more than they could ever guess. It was a Tuesday morning when it all began. The office was buzzing early. 2 foreign investors from Beijing were in the building for a high-stakes pitch. The presentation was scheduled in Executive Conference Room B, which Miles had just finished prepping. Lemon-scented polish still fresh on the glass table. He was kneeling, tucking the last stray wire behind the podium, when the investors entered with Elaine Whitmore, Landsberg's senior VP of Global Strategy. Sharp blonde bob, cream pantsuit, eyes that never softened. She didn't see Miles, didn't register him at all. That was her first mistake. The men from Beijing exchanged hurried words in Mandarin. Elaine laughed nervously, gesturing toward the table. "Please, have a seat. I know we've got translators on the way. Just a small mix-up with timing," she said. But the investors seemed concerned. Their tones quickened. One of them leaned in, muttering something under his breath. Miles froze, not because of what they said, but because of what they didn't want Elaine to know. One of them had just said, "She doesn't understand the market. She's copying that failed Tokyo campaign from The other responded, "We'll smile through the pitch, but we should call it off." Miles wasn't nosy, but words like that, they stuck. He stood up quietly, glanced toward the touchscreen that powered the projector. It wasn't responding. Standard glitch. He reached to the side panel, tapped twice, and rebooted the feed. As he did, he muttered, casually, "Try switching the source input to HDMI 2. That panel's buggy with DisplayPort." Both investors turned, startled. One replied, surprised, "你说中文? You speak Chinese?" Miles smiled slightly, brushing off his hands. "A little," he replied, modest, enough to get by. Elaine blinked, slowly. "You speak Mandarin?" she asked. Her voice had a slight edge, not surprise but suspicion. Like she'd just seen something that broke a rule she didn't know she'd made. Miles nodded. Among others. That should have been the end of it. But something in Elaine changed in that moment. A flicker. Her posture stiffened. Her tone cooled. She turned to the investors with new enthusiasm, overly compensating. "Gentlemen, if you're ready, let's begin. Our translation team will join us shortly." "Miles, thank you, you can go now." Miles collected his things and exited without a word. He didn't need to be told twice. He'd seen that look before, decades ago, in courtrooms and classrooms, in job interviews and traffic stops. The look that said, "You're out of place." By the time the meeting ended, Elaine was already in her office, pacing. The door was closed. Her assistant, Mallory, entered cautiously. "You wanted to see me?" Elaine turned sharply. "Did you know the janitor speaks Mandarin?" Mallory blinked. "Miles? No, why?" Elaine didn't answer. Instead, she pulled up the company's internal personnel database. Miles Carter. No photo. No academic history listed. Just facilities custodian. Shift B. She clicked into his file. Nothing suspicious. No HR flags. No complaints. But something didn't sit right. I want a background check, Elaine said. Full, comprehensive. And don't flag it. Just pull whatever we can from public records. Mallory hesitated. Is that legal? Elaine's smile was ice. Of course. We're a global firm. We vet people for less. What she didn't say was what she was really thinking. Why does a janitor know more about my investors than I do? Miles returned to the janitor's closet, a cramped utility space between the stairwells. He sat down on an overturned bucket, pulled out a tattered notebook, and began scribbling, not cleaning logs, but phonetic guides. His Mandarin needed brushing up, and the Beijing investors spoke with a regional dialect he hadn't practiced in years. He wasn't showing off earlier. It was instinct. Years ago, Miles had dreamed of being a field translator for the UN, before everything collapsed, before the system stole his name and rewrote his future. As he flipped a page, a voice spoke from the door. You really do speak it? It was Mallory, Elaine's assistant. Miles looked up, surprised. Mandarin? He asked. Yeah. Why? The question wasn't rude, just honest. Raw. Like she couldn't make sense of it. Miles closed the notebook gently. Because language opens doors, he said. And I've spent most of my life on the wrong side of them. Mallory didn't reply. She lingered in the doorway a moment longer, then turned and left. By Friday, strange things started happening. Miles noticed his ID badge beeped twice before unlocking the staff elevator. His access to the executive floors was temporarily restricted due to system updates. He was reassigned to evening shifts again, effective immediately. He didn't complain, but his hands shook when he signed the notice. Later that night, as he mopped the 17th floor hallway, he passed by the HR office. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, Elaine and Mark Liddell, the head of legal, were speaking in hushed tones. Elaine's voice was sharp. He's not just some polyglot janitor. There's more to him. I don't trust it. Mark responded calmly. We don't have anything on him. And if this backfires, Elaine snapped, then make something stick. We can't risk a security issue. Not now. Not with the Beijing deal. Miles stopped in his tracks. The word stung. Make something stick. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the notebook he had once filled with dreams. The pages were yellowing. The ink faded, but the languages were still there. His only crime was knowing them. The next morning, Miles arrived at work to find his locker open. His phone, missing. A folded slip of paper lay inside. Report to security. 9. No reason given. As he stood there, the hallway seemed to narrow. The hum of the building buzzed louder in his ears. Something was happening. Something he couldn't stop. And then his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Don't say a word. They're building a case. Miles read it twice, then a third time. The walls of the building that once held nothing but silence now whispered betrayal. And just like that, a janitor's quiet life was no longer his own. The text message burned in Miles Carter's hand long after the screen dimmed. Don't say a word. They're building a case. Who sent it? Why now? The questions tangled in his mind, knotted by something far deeper than fear. Memory. Because this wasn't the first time someone had tried to erase him. He sat alone in the employee break room, long after the others had clocked out. The hum of vending machines was the only sound. A half-empty coffee cup sat beside him, his badge still clipped to his collar, a symbol of labor worn like a leash. His eyes drifted to the wall, where a laminated employee excellence poster featured 3 smiling faces, none of them his. For most of the company, Miles was just the janitor. A function, a necessity, not a name. But behind the silence, behind the mop and the quiet compliance, there lived a man they had never bothered to ask about, because they assumed they already knew him. He was black. He was working class. He was lucky to have the job. What else could there be? New Orleans. Miles had been 18 when the letter arrived. Thick cream paper, Columbia University letterhead, full scholarship, linguistics, honors program. His mother, Dee Carter, cried that day. She held the letter like scripture. Baby, she whispered, you're going somewhere they can't ignore you. He believed her. Language had always been his superpower. By 12, he was fluent in French and Spanish, learned from library books and bus stop conversations. By 16, he'd added Arabic and Russian. By the time he reached Columbia's gates, he was already a prodigy. Professors fought over his placement. They called him a once-in-a-generation mind. But brilliance couldn't save him from a broken system. The arrest happened 3 months into his sophomore year. He'd been walking back from a late study group, Arabic syntax textbook, under his arm, when campus police stopped him near the faculty parking lot. Suspicious behavior, they said. Lingering near vehicles. Miles explained. Offered his ID. Explained again. They didn't listen. They cuffed him, threw his face against the hood of a squad car. He still remembered the chill of the metal. When they searched his backpack, they found nothing, only textbooks and a water bottle. But the charge was still filed. Attempted auto theft. A white freshman had reported a tall black man near her car, and that was enough. Columbia's administration promised it was a misunderstanding, but quietly suspended him pending investigation. The investigation dragged on for 7 months. During that time, Miles lost his scholarship, his housing, and eventually his faith. By the time the charges were dropped, the damage was done. His record was never expunged. Columbia offered no reinstatement. The New Orleans boy who once translated poetry in 6 tongues now worked night shifts at a gas station near the Harlem River. Because once the system marked you, you carried the stain forever, even if you never spilled it. He never went back to school. Not because he couldn't, but because every door that once welcomed him now measured him differently. Applications were denied. Interviews ghosted. One recruiter laughed outright when he saw Russian, Farsi, and Yoruba under the skills section. You expect me to believe that? So Miles stopped trying to prove anything. He learned instead how to stay quiet, how to observe, how to blend into rooms where his presence made others uneasy. He learned what kind of smile eased suspicion, and what tone of voice diffused tension. And he learned how to survive with dignity, even when the world stripped him of every other title. He worked warehouse floors, cleaned train depots, did inventory at night for international firms that didn't know or care that their boxes were being sorted by a man who could translate their shipping invoices without Google. And eventually, he landed at Landsbergen Row. The job came through a temp agency. No resume required, no background check detailed, just a uniform, a badge, and a locker in the basement. It wasn't a career, but it was quiet, and in that silence, Miles rebuilt something he thought he'd lost: his connection to language. Each day, as he swept through the offices of a global firm, he overheard fragments of conversations in Italian, Hindi, German, Swahili, and mentally translated them. Not to eavesdrop, to keep his mind sharp, to stay himself, even as the world insisted he had nothing left to offer. The irony, of course, was that he had spent so long hiding his intelligence that people like Elaine Whitmore had never imagined it could exist in the first place. To her, Miles was an aberration, a deviation from what she expected a black janitor to be. And when someone like Elaine is forced to confront her assumptions, she doesn't apologize, she retaliates. Her curiosity wasn't innocent. It came from entitlement, the kind that believes knowledge, intellect, and power belong to certain people. And if someone else possesses it, especially someone who doesn't look the part, then they must be lying, or dangerous. The way Elaine saw it, Miles knowing Mandarin wasn't impressive. It was suspicious. The system had taught her, like so many others, to fear what she couldn't control, and a black man, with 9 languages, no degree, and access to her floor, that was a threat she needed to neutralize. The week wore on like an invisible vice. Miles's shifts were shortened. He was given extra floors to clean, assigned dirty work normally split among multiple staff. The night supervisor stopped returning his nods. The vending machine near his closet was removed without notice. Small things, petty things, but deliberate. And through it all, Miles said nothing. Because he knew the rules of the game. He knew what happened to black men who raised their voices in white towers. He'd seen them escorted out by security while others watched through glass, pretending not to see. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. But silence does not mean surrender. That Friday, as he emptied trash in the legal department, he overheard a conversation that chilled him more than any court ruling ever had. Elaine's voice. Sharp. Direct. I don't care what his file says. Nobody learns those languages without training. There's more to this. He could be recording us, leaking internal data. Mark Liddell again. Cautious. You want us to open a formal investigation? It's risky. Elaine, I want him gone. Quietly. Before this becomes another headline. The trash bag slipped from Miles' hand. He caught it mid-fall, but the damage was done. A muffled thud echoed in the hallway. Inside the office, the voices stopped. He could feel them listening. Miles didn't wait. He moved. Fast. Steady. No panic. Back to the closet. Back to silence. But something had shifted. They weren't just suspicious of him now. They were plotting against him. Later that night, as he sat on his bed in his small Bronx apartment, Miles pulled out a faded folder from under the bed. Inside were photocopies of every rejection letter he'd ever received, old transcripts, legal documents, and one yellowed envelope, his mother's handwriting still on the front. They don't get to define you. Inside was the Columbia acceptance letter, the last proof of who he used to be. He traced the edge of the letter with his thumb, then folded it gently and put it back. Because the truth was, he'd never stopped being that person. He'd just learned how dangerous it was for people like him to look like they belonged. Back at Landsbergen Row, Elaine stood in front of a boardroom projector, pointing at slides for Monday's presentation. Behind her, her assistant entered the room with a small file folder, the background check on Miles. Elaine flipped it open, expecting vindication. What she found instead made her stop mid-sentence. She flipped the pages again. The file showed nothing incriminating. No recent offenses, no violations, no indication of espionage or misconduct. But there was one detail that sent a chill down her spine. A scanned excerpt from a university recommendation. Miles Carter is the most gifted linguist I've encountered in 30 years of academia. His mastery of language is only rivaled by his integrity. Dr. Edna Rice, Columbia University. Elaine closed the file slowly. That's when she made a decision, not to drop the matter, but to dig deeper. Not because she had evidence, but because her pride couldn't allow him to be more than what she already decided he was. And somewhere in the building, a digital file was created under the label, Miles Carter Internal Risk Assessment, the first strike in a battle he didn't know had already begun. The folder closed with a quiet snap, but the ripple it sent through the halls of Landsbergen Row would not be silent. Elaine Whitmore leaned back in her ergonomic chair, staring out the 42nd floor window, as the late afternoon sun bled into gold across the Manhattan skyline. In her hand, the thin file on Miles Carter sat like unfinished business. It wasn't enough. It had confirmed only the opposite of what she wanted, that he was brilliant, clean, and uncomfortably overqualified for the role he held. But something didn't sit right with her, not because of evidence, but because of instinct. And Elaine had built her career on instinct. She was the kind of executive who trusted her gut more than any dataset, who once shut down a $2 million campaign because the pitch felt desperate. She didn't need proof to act. And now, something about Miles Carter felt off. Too educated, too composed, too aware of things he shouldn't have access to. She didn't have facts, but she had a story. And in a building like this, that was all it took. It began as a whisper in the HR lounge. Elaine had waited for the right moment, the right person. Sherry Colts, mid-level HR rep, eager to rise, eager to please. Elaine approached casually, coffee in hand, eyes scanning the hallway, before she spoke. "Sherry," she said softly, "you handle background clearances, right?" Sherry nodded. "For new hires, yeah. And sometimes we monitor internal risk for senior team exposure." Elaine leaned in, almost conspiratorial. "I probably shouldn't say this, but I just found out our janitor, the one on 42, speaks military-grade Russian. Like, fluent. And Mandarin. And Arabic. It just raises some red flags, you know." Sherry blinked. "The janitor?" Elaine tilted her head, acting troubled. "I'm not saying anything's wrong, but in a company with this much global IP, access is delicate. Maybe someone should look into it?" She didn't give an order. She didn't need to. Within 48 hours, the whisper turned into a routine protocol review. Miles noticed the change immediately. He was called into HR for a quick meeting. No details. No heads up. Inside, Sherry greeted him with the brittle smile of someone masking discomfort with authority. Another man from legal, Kyle Hart, unfamiliar to Miles, sat beside her, silently reviewing a laptop screen. "We just have a few procedural questions, Mr. Carter," Sherry began. Miles sat upright, calm but wary. "Procedural about what?" Sherry smiled again. "Forced. It's nothing major. We've had recent investor activity with overseas branches, so we're doing a sweep of all employees who've had any international exposure or multilingual capability. Miles didn't flinch. I sweep floors. That's the only exposure I have. Kyle finally looked up. We noticed you listed multiple languages on your old agency application. Russian, Arabic, Mandarin. Oh, I never listed anything, Miles replied evenly. That was their intake form. I filled in what they asked. Kyle nodded slowly. And how did you learn these languages? Miles paused. Books, study, listening, living. It was the truth. But in this room, it sounded like defiance. Sherry leaned forward. Just to be clear, you've never received formal military or government training? No employment overseas? Miles raised an eyebrow. I barely leave the Bronx. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was colder than that, calculated, clinical. You understand, Mr. Carter, Sherry added carefully. In today's environment, we just have to be cautious. With everyone. Everyone. But not really. Not the executives who flew to Dubai for pitches. Not the sales reps who bragged about sleeping with European clients. Not the tech guy who downloaded half of a merger file by accident. Just him. The janitor who knew too much. Over the next week, the slow burn became a quiet fire. Security personnel began logging Miles' movements. He noticed his ID badge lit up red before turning green. Subtle delays. His janitorial cart, once parked in a neutral hallway, was now relocated to a lower floor closet, due to space. K-workers he'd casually greeted for years now nodded with hesitant, unsure glances, like he was carrying something contagious. He overheard things in passing. He's smart, too smart, you know? He's ex-military, right? Someone said he was caught hacking. It's always the quiet ones. Elaine never said a word to him directly. She didn't have to. Her story was doing its job. One morning, while refilling supplies, Miles ran into Terry, an older white facilities tech he'd worked with for years. Terry was one of the few who treated him like a person, cracked jokes, shared sex, passed the time. But today, Terry barely met his eyes. You good? Miles asked, testing the waters. Terry hesitated. They're saying some stuff, man. Security, HR, people talking about you like you're in trouble. Miles stiffened. I'm not. I know that, Terry said quickly. But I'm just saying. Folks don't care about truth. They care about what's easy to believe. And for some people, it was easier to believe that a black janitor with linguistic skill was a threat than a gift. Meanwhile, Elaine escalated the narrative. She began looping in legal affairs, arguing for proactive protocol in light of potential leaks. When asked for evidence, she cited pattern recognition and linguistic red flags. She attached articles about foreign influence in corporate espionage. Nothing connected directly to Miles, but the implication was clear. She even contacted IT security, under the guise of checking internal vulnerabilities. I'd like a quiet audit, she told them. Some employees with multilingual abilities might be unintentionally accessing sensitive data. It's better to verify. The phrasing was immaculate. Careful, legal. But underneath it all was the same old rot, suspicion rooted in racism, dressed in corporate language. The system didn't need a smoking gun. It just needed a little smoke. Jasmine Vega noticed it first. A 25-year-old Afro-Latina IT intern, Jasmine was sharp, meticulous, and observant. Traits honed not just by training, but by necessity. As one of the few black women in her department, she'd learned to see what others ignored. She was running audit logs for Elaine's request when she noticed something odd. Only one employee was being flagged across multiple systems. Not executives. Not developers with elevated access. Just a janitor. Just Miles Carter. Jasmine frowned, scrolling through entries. Badge access logs. Printer activity. Wi-Fi scans. Even his locker had been logged for a manual inspection. It didn't add up. Miles had neither the credentials nor the clearance to even reach secure drives. Why target him? She hesitated before reaching for her phone. But something in her gut told her, this wasn't about protocol. It was about power. That night, Miles sat on the fire escape outside his apartment, legs folded, notebook in his lap. The pages were worn now, filled edge to edge with translations, quotes, pieces of memory. He flipped to an older entry, a Swahili proverb he'd scribbled long ago. When the axe came into the forest, the trees said, "The handle is one of us." He read it twice. They didn't need to fire him to destroy him. All they had to do was plant the idea that he didn't belong, and the rest would unravel on its own. The following morning he was summoned again, this time by corporate compliance. He walked into a room with 2 chairs, 1 surveillance camera, and no welcome. A woman in a black blazer gestured for him to sit. "We're conducting a deeper review of employee behaviors that intersect with digital policy boundaries," she said mechanically. Miles leaned forward. "You think I'm stealing something?" She didn't answer. She just pulled up a photo on her laptop, a blurry shot from a hallway security feed. Miles, standing near the executive server room. Janitor cart visible. Door closed. "This was taken at 3:17 a.m. Can you explain?" Miles stared at it. "I was cleaning the elevator bank. That hallway connects both sides of the floor." "Did you access the room?" "No," he said calmly. "I don't even have clearance." Her silence was long. Too long. "Then, do you know what the word plausible deniability means?" He met her eyes. "Yes. In English and in 4 other languages." Across the hall, in a different office, Elaine watched the feed. She saw Miles sitting, still, unmoving, unbroken. Her lips curled slightly. "He's calm," she said to Mark Liddell. "Too calm." Mark sighed. "This is risky, Elaine. We're accusing someone with no evidence." Elaine turned. "We're not accusing, we're investigating. Subtly, carefully. Besides, isn't it better to be safe than sorry?" She turned back to the screen. The janitor hadn't cracked. Yet. But as Jasmine dug deeper into the audit trail, she discovered something buried, an email thread between Legal and Elaine, marked confidential flag Carter, and what she'd do next could either save Miles or destroy them both. The hum of fluorescent lights in the surveillance room was constant. Low, white noise that matched the chill in the air. The walls were lined with black monitors, each screen divided into quadrants. Lobbies, hallways, stairwells, server rooms, break rooms, elevators, all eyes, all the time. And now, one pair of those eyes belonged to Jasmine Vega. She sat stiffly in the IT substation next to security, watching as digital logs populated one after another, scrolling endlessly. Timestamps, badge swipes, wireless logins, elevator access points, printer usage, every action logged, every breath cataloged. But something wasn't adding up. For the past 3 days, she had been assigned to data clustering as part of her cybersecurity internship. At first it seemed routine, mapping employee activity to look for anomalies. She thought it was a simulation, a test, until she saw the name flagged again and again. Miles Carter. Not executives, not engineers with global clearance, just one man. And not just flagged isolate. She scrolled down, her brow furrowed. 6 unique flags were tied to Miles' ID: foreign language use, unscheduled floor presence, unusual metadata patterns, lingering near server room, elevated Wi-Fi bandwidth, and personal device inactivity. Inactivity. She clicked deeper. According to the system, Miles's phone hadn't pinged company Wi-Fi for 72 hours. That's not inactivity. That's confiscation. Downstairs, Miles stood in the corner of the locker room, arms crossed. His locker had been emptied and left ajar. His phone, wallet, and notebook were gone. No explanation. Just a note taped inside. Under compliance review. Property seized. He was tired. Beyond tired. He could feel the heat of invisible eyes watching him, wherever he moved. The hallways were no longer hallways. They were runways of suspicion. His footsteps echoed too loudly. His mop wheels squeaked with indictment. He had cleaned this building for nearly 4 years. Never once late. Never a complaint. Yet now, his silence, the very thing that made him safe, was being used against him. And for the first time in a long time, he was starting to feel cornered. Upstairs, Jasmine hesitated before taking the next step, but her instincts wouldn't let it go. She searched the database for other multilingual employees. Luis Cervantes, fluent in Spanish, Portuguese. Nina Patel, Hindi, Gujarati. Sven Keller, German, French. Isaiah Benton, French, Japanese, Swahili. None were flagged. Only Miles. Only the janitor who happened to speak the languages people feared. Jasmine clenched her jaw. This wasn't a protocol audit. It was a targeted takedown. She minimized the screen, took a deep breath, and walked out. The janitor's closet was empty when she arrived. The lights were off. Jasmine knocked gently on the open door before stepping in. Miles? She called softly. He appeared a second later from around the corner, holding a trash bin. His eyes were calm but clouded. He looked older than he had last week, like a man watching something slowly crumble around him. Hey, she said. You got a minute? Miles nodded slowly. Jasmine stepped in, closed the door halfway. She spoke quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I know what they're doing. Miles didn't react. She continued. The surveillance, the logs, the flagging. I saw your name across 6 triggers that don't even apply to your access level. And I checked. It's only you. Now he looked at her, sharp, measured. Why are you telling me this? Because it's wrong, she said simply. And because I've seen this before. He tilted his head. My mom, Jasmine explained. She cleaned hotels for 2 decades. She used to come home crying some nights because guests accused her of stealing earrings, phones, cash, no evidence, just assumptions. Management would always investigate, but nothing ever stuck. The pain did. Miles said nothing. But this, she continued, this isn't just racism. It's a setup, and it's coming from high up. Miles leaned against the mop sink, exhaling slowly. I know who it is, he said. Elaine Whitmore. Jasmine's eyes widened slightly. She started with whispers. Now it's becoming something bigger. They took my phone. My locker's empty. HR's asking me questions I haven't even had time to think about. He looked at her, truly looked. You're putting yourself at risk just by being in here. I know, she said, but you shouldn't be alone in this. The next morning, Jasmine printed out a set of redacted audit logs and stuffed them into a folder labeled Maintenance Requests, 42nd floor. She handed it to Miles in the service elevator without a word. Inside were the raw data entries showing illegal surveillance escalation. One log showed a manual override of locker access by Mallory Sharp, Elaine's assistant. Another showed a hidden internal thread between legal and HR titled Carter Protocol Pre-Review. Miles sat on a rooftop bench during his break, reading the pages slowly, each line pressed against his chest like a weight. They weren't just watching him. They were building a narrative. One page, near the bottom, nearly made him drop the packet. A screenshot of an email between Elaine and Mark Liddell. Let's find something that justifies this before PR gets wind. We don't want another diversity scandal. No mention of evidence. Just justification. Back in the IT department, Jasmine was called into a closed-door meeting with her supervisor, Andre, and 2 HR reps. We've noticed some irregularities in your access logs, Andre said, pulling data from unauthorized sectors. Jasmine remained calm. Those sectors were part of my clustering project, which you approved. Yes, but the files you accessed weren't directly assigned to your task. Specifically, employee audit files. Her heart thumped once, hard. Is there a concern about my work? She asked. Careful. One HR rep spoke next. There's concern about scope creep. Digging beyond what you were assigned can be seen as a breach of policy. Jasmine looked him dead in the eye. And if the data reveals unethical targeting of a specific employee? No one answered. 2 nights later, Miles was pulled aside by security again. This time, they escorted him, not asked. No smiles, no explanation. In a dim conference room, a compliance officer slid a small folder across the table. We've received credible concern about the nature of your behavior in restricted areas. Miles didn't touch the folder. I have no restricted access. She tapped the folder. It says you were seen near our executive servers. I cleaned that hallway. Why didn't you mention this earlier? Miles looked at her, unblinking. Because I didn't know I needed to. The compliance officer frowned. Failure to disclose spatial proximity can be interpreted as evasive. Miles leaned back. So now I'm guilty of walking? She didn't respond. He stood quietly. If I'm being accused of something, say it. If not, stop pretending this is something it's not. The door opened behind him. A signal to leave. As he walked out, he heard her mutter into her headset. He's stonewalling. Keep watching. Later that night, Miles walked into the janitor closet to find Jasmine already inside. Pacing. They pulled me into a disciplinary review, she said, frustrated. They're trying to scare me. You could still walk away, Miles said quietly. I'm not going to, she snapped. They're doing this because you scared them. He paused. I didn't do anything. You didn't have to, she replied. You just existed in a way they couldn't explain. That's what scared them. He sat down. They'll bury me before they admit what this is. Jasmine opened her laptop. Then we better start digging back. That weekend, Jasmine found an encrypted internal channel used by legal to send confidential requests to external firms, security contractors, data forensics, PR handlers. She managed to pull metadata tags only, not content, but one tag repeated: Lang Risk Profile Delta Carter. They weren't investigating behavior. They were labeling his mind as the risk. His intelligence, his education, his languages. That was the threat. Monday morning came with rain. The office was unusually quiet. Jasmine entered through the back entrance, avoiding eyes. Miles had been reassigned to the lower-level garage. Facility rotation, they called it. But she had one more thing. A flash drive. Inside were screenshots, logs, and the damning email between Elaine and legal. She slipped it into a small padded envelope, scrawled on the front: To Ethics Review Board. Urgent. She dropped it into the internal mail chute at 8:07 a.m. What happened next would either expose a racist campaign or trigger the final phase of their corporate cover-up. The envelope was thin, but the weight it carried pressed against Miles Carter's chest like a stone. He sat on the edge of his twin bed in the apartment he'd lived in for 8 years. A narrow one-bedroom overlooking the back of a bodega in the Bronx. The letter trembled slightly in his fingers. Effective immediately, your employment with Landsberg and Rowe is suspended pending internal investigation. No details. No accusations. Just 5 lines of corporate vagueness, wrapped in HR speak and signed with a digital signature. A polite execution. His phone, returned without ceremony that morning, now sat beside him. Silent and cold. The contacts list felt hollow. He had no one to call. No family close. No lawyer. No union. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who spoke 9 languages now had no one to speak to. He reached into his nightstand, pulled out his worn notebook, and stared at the first page. Language is a bridge, but only if someone's willing to cross. He closed it gently. He had crossed so many bridges, and now, one by one, they were being burned behind him. Across the city, Jasmine Vega stared at her screen, frozen. She was in a dimmed corner of the server-side database, logged in under a supervisor's credential she shouldn't have had access to, but she'd watched enough audits to know where the cracks were. She had followed a suspicious file path buried in the company's compliance folder, a misnamed archive labeled innocuously OpsDec 0429, follow-up. Inside were dozens of attachments: meeting transcripts, slide decks, strategy notes, legal queries. She clicked one labeled HR Response ELW Confidential BE. The document opened with a summary of a now-defunct compliance review. But halfway down, she saw it. Elaine Whitmore to legal March 8. We can't risk the optics of another black lawsuit. Get him out quietly. Flag his behavior. Shift the narrative, and eliminate exposure before PR gets wind. Jasmine's mouth parted. Breath caught. She read it again. Another black lawsuit. It wasn't about data, or espionage, or policy. It was about race. The language was surgical. Calculated. Elaine hadn't said Miles by name, but it was clear. The timeline. The targets. The coordinated red flags. They hadn't been investigating a security threat.
They were conducting a preemptive cover-up.
Jasmine screenshot everything. Every email, every metadata tag, every attached memo. She uploaded the files onto an encrypted USB and hid it in the lining of her work bag. Her pulse raced as she closed the laptop, wiped the browser trail, and slipped out of the server room unnoticed. In the elevator, she stared at her reflection. Her hands were trembling. Her mouth was dry. She was just an intern, a name on a temporary badge, not even eligible for benefits yet. If they caught her, they wouldn't just end her internship. They'd blacklist her before her career ever began. But she thought about her mother. How she once came home in tears after being falsely accused of taking a guest's earrings at the hotel. Security had strip-searched her while she sobbed. And when they found nothing, the manager said, "Well, you still shouldn't have been in the room unsupervised." No apology. No dignity. That moment had shaped Jasmine's life. It was the day she decided to study systems, not just how to work inside them, but how to expose them. And now, she had something that could break this one wide open. 2 floors up, behind a door labeled Executive Operations Suite, authorized entry only, Elaine paced, arms crossed, her voice low and sharp as she spoke into her headset. "We suspended him," she said into the mic. "Compliance sent the letter this morning. He hasn't responded. No calls to legal. No public noise. Not yet." Mark Liddell's voice replied through the speaker. You think that's the end of it? No, Elaine muttered. But it buys us time. We'll position it as due diligence. Internal concern, nothing racial. You don't think PR will smell this? Elaine turned to the glass wall, watching the rain streak down the window. Only if someone leaks something. Mark paused. You still want to push termination? Elaine didn't hesitate. Yes. Quietly. By the board meeting. And if he challenges it? She narrowed her eyes. Then we drown him in HR jargon, until he disappears. Meanwhile, Jasmine stepped into a quiet cafe off 53rd Street. She pulled out her laptop and inserted the USB. She created a dummy email, uploaded the key screenshots, and drafted an anonymous message to Miles Carter. Subject line: You were never the problem. Read this. But before she hit send, a notification popped up on her phone. Mandatory intern meeting. 4 p.m. 7th floor conference. Mandatory? She'd never received one before. Her throat tightened. Was she caught? She closed the laptop and deleted the draft. For now. At exactly 4:01 p.m., Jasmine entered the glass-walled conference room. 3 people were already seated. Andre from IT, Mallory from Elaine's team, and a third woman she didn't recognize. Sharp suit, tight smile, eyes that scanned like scanners. Jasmine sat down slowly. The unnamed woman introduced herself. Ms. Vega, I'm Rhonda Clemens, Corporate Oversight Liaison. She slid a sealed folder across the table. We're conducting an internal audit of IT behavior during recent compliance activities. Specifically, unauthorized access. Jasmine kept her face still. Am I being accused of something? Not yet, Rhonda said. But we do want to clarify how certain archived files were retrieved without departmental clearance. Jasmine's heart raced. Had someone seen her? I was working under project clustering parameters, she replied. Everything I touched was within the metadata mapping workflow. That's not what our logs suggest, Rhonda said coldly. Mallory crossed her arms. There's concern that someone's been overreaching. Jasmine met her gaze, unflinching. Or maybe someone's just paying attention. Andre shifted uncomfortably. Rhonda didn't flinch. She pulled out another file. We'll be reviewing your access logs over the next 48 hours. If any breach is confirmed, your internship will be suspended immediately. Jasmine nodded once. Understood. But she didn't wait. She stood, calm, professional. I have nothing to hide. And with that, she walked out, head high, heart pounding. That night, Jasmine finally sent the anonymous email. But she also made another copy of the USB and walked it 2 blocks south to a quiet, tucked-away office labeled Whistleblower Protection Line, Private Intake. Inside, she handed the envelope to a clerk who barely looked up. No names, she said. The clerk nodded. She walked out before her legs could start shaking. The next morning, Miles woke to the email. He sat up in bed, blinked at the screen. His fingers hovered over the mousepad. He clicked the message. Rid, then rid again. The line hit him like a punch. We can't risk the optics of another black lawsuit. Get him out quietly. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't suspicion. It was strategy. They had planned this. Systematically. Clinically. Casually. He leaned back, closed his eyes. He hadn't been suspended for breaking rules. He had been suspended for breaking expectations. The board meeting was now less than 48 hours away. Jasmine and Miles met in a small park just off the West Side Highway, seated on opposite ends of a damp bench. He looked at her with the weight of someone who'd lived through too many false hopes. You risked everything for this, he said quietly. So did you, she replied. They just don't know it yet. Miles held the printed email in his hand. Do you think this is enough? Not alone, she admitted. But if we play it right, if we get the board's attention before Elaine spins it, it could trigger a formal ethics review.
They'll try to bury it.
Not if the press sees it too. He looked up sharply. You want to go public? I want a safety net, she said. 1 leak, to 1 journalist. Not now, but ready, if they try to shut this down. He didn't answer immediately. The idea scared him. Exposure, headlines, internet mobs. But what scared him more was staying silent. Again, Jasmine placed a second file folder in his hand. What's this? He asked. A copy of the audit logs, timestamps, language triggers, everything they used to build the fake case. Miles stared at it. You sure? She nodded. Let's bring this to the board. He exhaled. 2 days, 48 hours, to prepare for a room full of people trained to ignore people like him. But this time, he wasn't walking in alone. What none of them knew was that Elaine had a final trick ready, and the next move in her smear campaign would risk tearing the company in half. The HR complaint had barely been filed before the war began. It started with a headline, small, local, but loaded with implications. Janitor with criminal past suspended in language espionage probe. Miles Carter sat frozen in his apartment, the article open on his laptop. His name wasn't mentioned directly, but the description was unmistakable. A black maintenance worker, at a major midtown branding firm, fluent in multiple languages, now under internal investigation for unusual access patterns. The article cited anonymous sources within the company. He knew exactly who. Elaine hadn't just retaliated. She'd escalated, and now she was controlling the narrative, framing him as a national security risk, planting the idea that his intelligence was a threat, not a gift. What had started as silent suspicion had now become a public stain. He scrolled down, reading each line like a bruise. The article referenced sealed juvenile records, a prior suspension from university, and behavioral discrepancies, words crafted to imply criminality without stating it, to weaponize half-truths against someone who couldn't afford the full story to be heard. Across the city, Jasmine Vega stared at the same article, her jaw tight. She picked up her phone and called him. "Miles, I saw it," he said flatly. There was silence between them. "They're playing dirty," she muttered. "They always were," he replied. She paused, then spoke carefully. "We don't have to go to the board alone. If we leak the email now, force their hand." "No," Miles said. His voice was calm, but there was a strain underneath. "If I go public now, I lose control. I become whatever they say I am." Jasmine hesitated. "But they're painting you as a fraud." "They want me to panic," Miles said. "So I won't." "Not yet," she nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "But we're running out of time." The next day, Miles's suspension became the centerpiece of a PR spin campaign, orchestrated with surgical cruelty. Elaine's team briefed the internal staff that the company was cooperating fully with a confidential compliance inquiry regarding a sensitive employee matter. Press inquiries were deflected with statements like, "We cannot confirm any allegations at this time, and security protocols are being reviewed as part of our standard procedure." Behind the scenes, however, emails and calls were being made. Media outlets received tips from concerned insiders. Background checks were leaked selectively. Not the dismissal of Miles's charges from college, but the arrest itself, framed without context. No mention of innocence. No mention of how the charges were dropped after a wrongful ID. Instead, the press got a sanitized version of character assassination. One email, leaked to an entertainment blog, said, "A multilingual janitor who claimed to have no formal training but could speak Russian and Arabic. Something doesn't add up. Worth digging into." Within 24 hours, Twitter threads popped up questioning if Miles was deep cover, a plant, a danger to corporate national security. He was being unmade in real time. Miles avoided the internet for a full day. When he finally checked again, the story had spread further. Comments were everywhere. "Why would a janitor know Swahili? Sounds fake. Criminal past, hiding in plain sight. If you don't belong in a building like that, they'll find out eventually." He should be grateful he had a job at all. Grateful. The word stabbed deepest. Because that's what they really meant. Not grateful for the chance, but grateful to be tolerated. In the middle of the storm, Jasmine moved fast. She contacted a legal advocacy group that supported workplace discrimination cases. She encrypted a copy of the email and audit logs and handed them over to an intake specialist named Nia Brandt, a no-nonsense civil rights lawyer with eyes like searchlights and zero patience for power games. "I've seen this 100 times, Nia said after skimming the document. "They don't want to fight. They want an exit. They'll smear, then settle." Miles stayed quiet, listening. "But," she continued, "this email, this changes things. You've got grounds for a federal claim, and if it goes public, they'll drown trying to clean it up." She looked at him. "The question is, how far do you want to take this?" Miles stared out the window. "Far enough," he thought, "that they remember my name." But even with legal help, the tide didn't turn. A second article hit, this time from a more established business site. "Midtown firm suspends worker amid language security breach." No mention of race. No mention of Elaine. No mention of wrongful suspension. Just the language of caution. Potential foreign infiltration. Routine precaution. Unusual multilingual access from non-essential personnel. It sounded factual, reasonable, even responsible. And that's what made it so dangerous, because it framed Miles as a breach of protocol, not a human being, not a man, just a variable to remove from the equation. On the third day, something unexpected happened. An old video surfaced, posted by a retired school teacher in Louisiana. Grainy cell phone footage from a community center, dated nearly 10 years prior. Miles, standing before a classroom of kids, teaching them how to say hello in 10 languages, laughing, teaching, breaking down sounds in Swahili, Arabic, French, and Portuguese. The caption read, "This man taught my students languages, no one else in our school would. We had no budget. He showed up anyway. Don't believe everything you read." It was barely a minute long, but it hit like lightning. Jasmine saw it first, then others. The clip racked up 10,000 views, then 50,000, then 300,000. Hashtags started trending. Miles Carter, linguist, not threat. Ye taught us too. A former classmate posted, "I went to Columbia with him. Miles helped me pass Mandarin. He didn't belong in a janitor's closet. He belonged at the UN." A youth pastor in Brooklyn shared a photo of Miles speaking at a teen literacy event, writing, "He gave my kids books in 5 languages. They'd never seen their mother tongue on a page before." For the first time, the internet saw the man, not the accusation, and it moved fast. That night, Miles sat at his kitchen table, eyes on his phone, watching the numbers rise. It wasn't vindication, not yet, but it was light breaking through smoke. Jasmine called, voice bright with adrenaline. "You're going viral." Miles chuckled, not joyfully, but disbelieving. He had been silenced, shamed, cornered, and now strangers were writing poems under his name. "They're starting to see," she said. He nodded, barely breathing, but deep down, he wondered, how long before they try to shut this down too? Elaine watched from her office. The door closed tight. Mallory stood beside her, nervous. The videos everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, even LinkedIn. Elaine said nothing. "Should we respond?" Mallory asked. Elaine slowly turned, eyes narrowed. "No," she said. "We redirect." Mallory blinked. "To what?" Elaine tapped her desk. "To the lawsuit. Let's leak the criminal complaint. Stir the old Columbia mess. Frame it as a pattern." Mallory hesitated. "Won't that make it look targeted?" Elaine didn't blink. "It is targeted. We just can't let it look personal." The next morning, a new post appeared on a tabloid site. "Suspended janitor once charged in campus theft." Same pattern. The article was vague, heavy on suggestion, light on fact. But the timing was clear. They were trying to drag him down before the board meeting. Jasmine called Nia. "They're doing it again." Nia was already ahead. "I've filed a cease and desist, but if they want to play dirty," she paused, "then it's time we make this story national." As Miles looked at the article headline, his phone buzzed with a new text, a number he didn't recognize. He opened it. Just 4 words. "Check your front door." He stood, walked to the door, and opened it slowly. There, on his doorstep sat a box. Inside it, a burned copy of an internal company drive. On the label, Elaine. Legal. PR. Files. No sender. No note. Just a drive that could blow the lid off everything. But if he opened it, he'd discover a betrayal he never saw coming. The USB drive sat on the kitchen table like a loaded weapon. Miles stared at it for nearly an hour before sliding it into the side port of his laptop. The files opened immediately. Folders labeled PR strategy, containment, Elaine draft statements, legal paths, termination options. It was all there. Slide decks, talking points, even a media rollout plan titled post-termination justifications. But what stopped him cold was one document labeled simply, contingencies, internal whistle. Inside, beneath bullet points and damage control drafts, was a list of potential leak risks. Jasmine Vega's name was there, highlighted, red flagged. His heart dropped. They were preparing to scapegoat her if the story spun out of control. His stomach clenched at the betrayal, not from Jasmine, but from how ruthlessly they were willing to throw anyone under the bus. Anyone who dared to say, "This isn't right." He closed the laptop, leaned back in the chair, and rubbed his temples. They weren't just silencing him. They were building a machine designed to destroy anyone who stood in their way. And yet, despite it all, he wasn't alone. Somewhere else in the city, a man in his late 80s sat in a modest wheelchair, a knit blanket over his knees, eyes squinting at a computer screen in a quiet apartment on the Upper West Side. Abram Weiss had seen the news days earlier, but hadn't recognized the name. Not until he saw the video, the one of Miles teaching kids how to say hello in 10 languages. That voice, that smile, that calm cadence. It hit him like a wave crashing into a forgotten shore. He wheeled over to a bookshelf, pulled down a dusty photo album, and flipped to the page that confirmed what his heart already knew. There, in a faded snapshot from 10 years ago, was Miles Carter, standing outside the service elevator of their old apartment building, wearing a maintenance jacket and holding a door open for a stretcher. Abram remembered that day better than most. It was the day he almost died. A stroke had gripped his body suddenly, freezing his limbs, twisting his face. He had lost the ability to speak clearly. Only fragmented German escaped his mouth, his native tongue from childhood. The paramedics who responded couldn't understand him. The building manager had panicked, but then a calm, steady voice spoke in fluent German, translating every symptom, every gasp, every plea. It was Miles, the janitor, the man no one had ever spoken to directly, who worked quietly in the shadows. Miles had ridden in the ambulance that day, translating the entire way. He had stayed in the hospital waiting room until Abram's daughter arrived. No one had asked him to. He just did it. And then, like a ghost, he returned to his shift, scrubbing floors that sparkled by morning. Abram opened his laptop again. His fingers trembled over the keys, but his mind was sharp. He opened Facebook, typed for 20 minutes, deleted the draft twice, and then finally posted. When I had my stroke 10 years ago, no one in my building knew I spoke German. I couldn't communicate, couldn't breathe, couldn't explain what was happening. The only person who understood me, literally, was our janitor. He spoke to the paramedics in perfect German. He saved my life. His name was Miles Carter. Today I see his name dragged through the mud by people who don't know him, who only see what they want to see. I can't stay quiet. He saved me when I couldn't speak. Now they silence him. Don't let them. Within hours, the post began to circulate. At first just among his old friends, then their children, then their networks, then journalists. By the next morning it had gone viral. Major news accounts shared it with the headline, "Elderly Holocaust Survivor Defends Suspended Janitor Accused of Espionage." Local channels picked it up, then national outlets. Someone found the paramedic report that corroborated the story. The narrative shifted sharply, like a train slamming onto a new track. Miles wasn't just a suspended janitor anymore. He was a hero who had once saved a man's life using the very languages he was now being punished for speaking. Public reaction was swift and loud. People began commenting under the company's social media accounts. "This is who you're trying to destroy. He's more qualified than your entire C-suite. Hire him back or shut it down." Elaine's PR machine scrambled to regain footing. Crisis response meetings were called at dawn. Memos circulated about narrative repositioning. They drafted statements about reopening the investigation and recognizing the importance of internal equity reviews. But it was too late, because now Miles had a name. Not just a story, he wasn't invisible anymore. He was the man who spoke for the voiceless. Quite literally, the media began reaching out for interviews. Civil rights organizations posted petitions calling for his reinstatement. Former co-workers, tenants and students who had been touched by his kindness or his teaching flooded social media with testimonials. And inside Landsbergen Row, the executive board grew nervous. Elaine paced in her office, white-knuckled, while Mallory read updates from her phone. "They're calling for your resignation," she said. "Commenters are pulling up your old donation history." There's a screenshot of the email quote going around. Someone leaked it. Elaine's eyes narrowed. "It was Jasmine," she said. "I warned them she was a risk."
Mallory hesitated.
"Or it was someone else. There are rumors. Legal is flipping." Elaine snapped. "Then get ahead of it. We release a statement now. One that acknowledges the complexity of the situation, without admitting fault." Mallory didn't move. "People aren't buying complexity anymore," she said softly. "They want truth." Elaine turned away. Truth wasn't what she had built her career on. Spin, control, perception, those were her tools. But now, they were unraveling faster than she could contain. Meanwhile, in his apartment, Miles sat quietly on the edge of his bed, as his phone lit up with interview requests. ABC, NPR, even a call from a producer at 60 Minutes. But he ignored them all for now. What moved him most wasn't the headlines. It was the messages from strangers. A woman from Chicago, whose son saw his video and asked to learn Swahili. A teenager in Alabama, who said, "I thought I was dumb because no one in my school speaks like me. Then I saw you." A janitor in Detroit who wrote, They treat us like ghosts until they need something. Thanks for showing them we're more. Miles scrolled slowly, eyes welling. And then another text came in from Jasmine. It read simply board meeting confirmed. 36 hours. They're panicking. Miles stared at the screen. He didn't feel triumphant, not yet. He felt focused. They had tried to erase him. Now they would have to face him. And just as he began to type a response to Jasmine, his phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. The message read, "You should know. Someone inside is preparing a new claim against you. Before the board meets, they're going to flip the narrative again. You have 24 hours to counter it, or you'll lose the room." He froze, because the number wasn't unfamiliar after all. It was from Mallory, Elaine's own assistant. The sky above Midtown Manhattan was unusually gray that morning, not stormy, just still, like the city was holding its breath. On the 42nd floor of Landsbergen Row, the tension wasn't weather-related. Word had spread like static. An emergency board meeting. Attendance mandatory. Executives shifted in their offices. Assistants whispered behind glass. The mood was surgical, clean, precise, and cold. In the lobby outside the boardroom, Miles Carter stood waiting. He wore a plain button-down and pressed slacks. Not a suit, but not a uniform either. His hands were calm, tucked in front of him, but inside his heart ticked like a metronome. Across from him, Jasmine Vega reached into her bag and pulled out a small black flash drive. "It's all on here," she said quietly. "Every email, every log, every timestamp. The legal thread where they called you a PR risk. The draft quote Elaine tried to delete." Miles took it gently. "You sure you're ready for this?" "I'm more sure of this," she said, "than anything I've ever done." At that moment, the tall glass doors slid open. A voice called, "They're ready." They stepped inside. The boardroom at Landsbergen Row was designed to intimidate. 30-foot ceilings, glass walls with panoramic city views, a table longer than most New York apartments, and chrome accents that reflected everything, including discomfort. At the far end sat Marla Dresden, chairwoman of the board, flanked by 10 executives. On the side wall, a full-length digital projector waited to be powered on. Elaine sat 3 seats from the front, legs crossed, posture perfect. She wore dark navy, no jewelry, and her expression was pure performance, unreadable but not innocent. Mallory, her assistant, was conspicuously absent. Marla's voice cut through the murmurs. "This meeting is to discuss the recent suspension of Mr. Carter and claims of procedural misconduct by multiple parties. All present will be heard. No welcome, no apology, just formality." Miles nodded once and took the floor. He plugged in the flash drive. The screen flickered, then filled with folders. There was no need for flourish. He opened one labeled Elaine Whitmore Com Legal and clicked the first file. A single slide appeared. Black text on white background. "We can't risk the optics of another black lawsuit. Get him out quietly." The room stiffened. A few board members shifted in their seats. One investor uncapped a pen and started writing furiously. Elaine didn't blink. Miles spoke for the first time, his voice low but clear. "I was hired to clean your floors. I swept under desks, where deals were made. I mopped up after your late-night strategy sessions. I've heard enough silence in this building to recognize when it turns into something worse." He clicked to the next file. "Flag his behavior. Shift the narrative. Eliminate exposure before PR gets wind." Gasps rippled from the back of the room. Marla's lips tightened. Elaine finally spoke. "This is out of context." But Miles raised a hand. "No, Miss Whitmore. What's out of context is the life I've lived, reduced to a profile in your system. You saw a janitor who could speak languages you didn't understand, and instead of asking why, you asked how fast you could get rid of me." Another click. This time, a video. Security footage. Elaine walking into legal, holding the very folder that launched the suspension memo. "This was never about security," Miles said. "It was about fear. Fear that I didn't fit into the box you built for someone like me." Elaine's voice sharpened. "You're twisting this." Miles turned to her. "Steady." "Am I? Then let me be clear." He turned back to the board, and then, one by one, he began to speak. "Good morning," he said in perfect French. "Thank you for your time." In Japanese. "I am not a threat." In Russian. "My story matters." In Arabic. "I earned my place." In Mandarin. "Don't look away now." In Yoruba. "I will be heard." In German. "You can't bury truth." In Hindi. And finally, You called me a janitor, but I speak the language of the world, in English. The room was silent. The kind of silence that follows the collapse of a lie. Miles let the weight settle. Then he turned back to Marla. I've never been ashamed of the work I do. But I am ashamed of how this company handled the truth. I was not suspended for misconduct. I was punished for not being invisible. Marla leaned forward. What outcome do you seek, Mr. Carter? He paused. I want an apology. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been written off for looking like me, speaking like me, learning more than they were supposed to. He paused again, then added, and I want Miss Whitmore held accountable. Elaine stood, fire rising behind her eyes. You don't get to dictate consequences. But her voice cracked as Marla raised a hand. You will remain seated, Miss Whitmore. Elaine hesitated, then obeyed. Marla looked around the room. We'll go into private deliberation. Mr. Carter, Miss Vega, you'll be informed within 24 hours. Miles nodded. But just as he turned to leave, Elaine stood again, louder this time. No, I'm not going to be your scapegoat, she said. You're all looking at me like I created this, like I invented the doubts. But don't forget, I got those doubts from you. She turned to the board. From all of you. Gasps again. Murmurs. Uncertainty. Elaine's hands shook slightly now, the cracks forming in her perfect exterior. You read the same reports I did. You nodded when I flagged him. You gave your silent approval. And now that it's ugly and public and inconvenient, you want to pretend you were shocked. She laughed bitterly. I won't let you. The room fell quiet again, but the tone had shifted, not in her favor. Because her outburst wasn't noble. It was defensive. Self-preserving. And it only confirmed what Miles had already proven. Outside the boardroom, Jasmine caught up with him. You did it, she said, breathless. I didn't, he replied quietly. Truth did. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone. The messages were still pouring in, but one stood out. An anonymous number. Just a sentence. You made your move. Now watch theirs. Jasmine glanced at the screen. What does that mean? Miles didn't answer, because as the elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside, his phone buzzed again, this time, with an alert. Breaking Landsbergen Row internal leak suggests whistleblower targeted feds may investigate. Jasmine's eyes widened. They're being investigated now? Miles read the headline. No, he said slowly. They're pretending to investigate themselves, to stay ahead of the real one. He looked down the hallway, and saw Elaine, exiting a side office, talking to a man in a federal-looking suit. What Miles didn't know was that Elaine had just cut a private deal, and someone on the board had betrayed him to protect their own seat. The elevator hadn't even reached the lobby before Miles' phone buzzed again. Another headline, another attempt to spin, but it wasn't from a journalist. It was from the company's official press account. Landsbergen Row reaffirms its commitment to employee safety, amid escalating concerns. A full compliance review is underway. Jasmine looked at it over his shoulder and muttered, They're pivoting hard. Miles exhaled. Or laying the groundwork. The doors opened. The lobby was quiet, but something about the stillness felt manufactured, like a set that had just been cleared. Security guards nodded, too politely. A receptionist smiled too quickly. Miles could feel it. Something had shifted. Then his phone buzzed again. This time, a legal alert. Subject line. Notice of complaint filed. Whitmore versus Carter. His heart dropped. He opened it. Elaine Whitmore, Senior VP of Global Strategy, was filing a civil suit for workplace harassment and emotional distress, citing inappropriate and persistent use of intimidating foreign language phrases during internal meetings, a calculated psychological campaign, and behavior designed to undermine the safety and comfort of a female executive. The phrasing was slick, weaponized. Jasmine gasped when she read over his shoulder. She's saying you harassed her? By existing? Miles asked quietly. Jasmine's voice dropped to a whisper. She flipped the entire script. Miles read the last line again. The plaintiff reserves the right to demand immediate termination and full reputational separation. Inside the 42nd floor boardroom, Elaine sat with 3 board members and the company's general counsel. Her hands were folded in front of her, demeanor composed. The meeting had been called in less than an hour. Her legal team had prepared the statement. Her delivery was flawless. I have tolerated targeted behavior, she began, masked under the guise of multilingual performance. These phrases, delivered in foreign dialects, were chosen specifically to exclude, unsettle, and intimidate me. They were meant to position me as culturally inferior, and I felt unsafe in my own workplace. General Counsel nodded slowly. You believe Mr. Carter's actions were strategic and targeted? Elaine responded without blinking. Absolutely. This wasn't an accident. It was a power move. Every phrase was designed to embarrass me, especially in front of global clients. A pause. Then she added, if we allow this, we're condoning reverse intimidation. I'm asking for immediate termination pending litigation. And just like that, the tides turned again. Downstairs, Miles sat in a small legal office provided by the company, waiting. The same building he had spent 4 years cleaning now asked him to wait in silence while it decided if he was too dangerous to exist within its walls. Jasmine paced nearby. They're not even pretending this is about facts anymore, she said. It's strategy. Reverse the roles. Make you the aggressor. Miles stayed quiet. His hands were still, but his eyes were heavy with understanding. Do you think the board will buy it? Jasmine asked. They don't need to buy it, he replied. They just need it to be convenient. The next morning, the decision came swiftly. Miles Carter. Terminated pending litigation review. Effective immediately. No appeal process. No hearing. Just gone. A carefully worded internal memo was sent to the staff. Mr. Carter's departure reflects our evolving standards around executive safety and internal professionalism. We thank him for his service. It was phrased like a handshake, but it was a public beheading. Miles didn't return home right away. Instead, he walked, block after block, with no destination in mind. The city pulsed around him. Horns, voices, concrete. It all blurred together. Every corner he passed felt like a reflection of something he'd built and lost. His dignity, framed as danger. His language, spun as a weapon. His silence, used as evidence. He found himself near the same community center where he once taught kids to say hello, in a dozen tongues. The building was closed for renovations now, windows boarded. But he stood there a long time, staring at the door. He had opened so many. Why did every one of them end with someone else slamming it shut? Back at Landsberg, Jasmine wasn't done. She dug deeper into the company's internal archive, searching every dusty policy, every forgotten guideline, every procedural appendix no one had opened in decades. And then she found it. A scanned PDF, watermarked from 1996. A supplemental clause buried in the original company charter, under Section 7, Whistleblower Protection and Non-Executive Immunity. It stated, any employee or contractor, regardless of status, providing documented evidence of unethical, racial, or retaliatory conduct by an executive shall be protected from termination or reputational discipline for a minimum of 20 days, pending internal ethics review. She blinked. Miles was protected. The board had just broken its own foundation. She printed it, highlighted the clause, ran straight to Nia Brandt, the civil rights attorney. Nia read it twice. Then she smiled, slow and sharp. This, she said, is a loaded gun they forgot they wrote. By the end of the day, a cease and desist was filed against Landsberg and Rowe for breach of internal protection policy. A formal ethics complaint was hand-delivered to the board, with Jasmine's audit logs, the original flash drive, and the whistleblower clause. And for the first time, the company wasn't holding the narrative. They were cornered. Elaine's countersuit began to unravel the moment a journalist leaked the email from Mallory, the one suggesting the harassment claim was a tactical angle to neutralize media. The company tried to deny it, but Mallory, sensing her career teetering, quietly confirmed its authenticity to federal review. Within 48 hours, the lawsuit was frozen. Elaine was placed on administrative leave. And Miles? He was invited to meet with federal investigators, not as a suspect, but as a witness. The morning after the announcement, Jasmine met Miles on the steps outside the building. Whistleblower clause, she said, handing him the printed page. Miles read it once, then looked at her. Where did you find this? Appendix D, subsection B, tucked inside a scanned folder labeled Old Legal Archive. He laughed softly. All these years, I was cleaning around it. She smiled. Turns out, the janitor knew where the bodies were buried. But even as the truth caught up, Elaine wasn't finished. Behind closed doors, she began negotiating an exit package. A quiet payout. No admission of wrongdoing. Just silence. When the board resisted, she offered something else. A list of other internal blind spots. Old diversity memos, buried harassment cases, race-based pay discrepancies. She was prepared to blow the whole system up. unless she walked away clean. It was blackmail, sanitized as cooperation. But someone on the board agreed. As Miles walked away from the building that day, a thought lingered in his mind. Justice was never loud. It was patient, sharp, ruthless when cornered. He had been buried in silence. But Jasmine had found the one clause that whispered, "You don't have to stay quiet." And now, they would listen. But just as he reached his block, his phone buzzed again. A number he didn't know. The message read, "She's leaking your Columbia file. The one they sealed. Check the alumni board." He stopped cold. Because if Elaine was playing her final card, it meant the truth about his past was about to go public. And what the world was about to learn could change everything. The message about Columbia hit like a delayed grenade. Miles stood on the corner outside his building, his thumb still hovering over the screen, the text still blinking. "She's leaking your Columbia file. The one they sealed." He knew immediately what it meant. He had fought for years to keep those records buried. Not because they proved guilt, but because they painted him with the brush of institutional betrayal. The arrest, the false accusation, the trial that never made it to sentencing because the truth was too late in arriving. Columbia had sealed the file at his insistence, quietly, after an alumnus wrote a letter of advocacy on his behalf. But the paperwork was still there, and now apparently so was Elaine. By the time he opened the alumni board's private portal, the damage was already underway. A vague thread titled, "Remember this guy?" The real story behind Miles Carter had nearly 300 comments. The original post didn't say much, just a screenshot of the arrest from a decade ago, with no context, no explanation, just enough to reignite doubt, just enough to smear. Miles didn't speak for hours. He simply watched. The flood of online defense he'd built over weeks now cracked along its edges. "Wait, so he was arrested?" one comment asked. "Is he lying to everyone?" another added. Even sympathetic voices faltered. "I still support him, but we can't pretend the past doesn't matter." Jasmine called twice. He didn't answer. He needed air, but when he stepped outside, the city didn't feel like fresh air. It felt like pressure, like everything he'd clawed back was slipping again through the fault line of someone else's fear. The next morning, he received the email. Subject: confidential settlement and leadership proposal. For review only. It came from Marla Dresden's office, the board chair herself. The body of the message was short, but loaded. "Mr. Carter, given the current climate and recent legal findings, we believe it is in the company's best interest to resolve this matter without further litigation or reputational damage. We would like to offer immediate reinstatement, with full retroactive compensation, a formal public apology from the executive team, a new leadership role, head of global linguistic training and multicultural strategy, effective immediately, rights to oversee the company's internal diversity overhaul." It ended with a thin sentence. "We hope this can serve as a meaningful step toward reconciliation." Miles read it 3 times. It was everything he'd never dared to ask for. But something about it felt off, like a castle built on ash. He forwarded it to Jasmine. She replied in 3 words. "It's a trap?" He replied, "Or a test." That afternoon, the offer was announced internally. Not the lawsuit, not the scandal, just the appointment. "We're proud to share that Miles Carter has accepted a new role leading our global cultural and linguistic innovation initiative." The announcement came with a photo. Miles from years ago, smiling modestly at a volunteer event, cropped to look like a headshot. Comments poured in beneath the post on the company's internal portal. Most were polite. Some were genuine. A few were passive-aggressive. "Interesting choice. Didn't know janitorial had promotion tracks."
Well, diversity win?
Miles watched it all, seated in the same apartment, the same clothes, the same air conditioner groaning in the background. Somehow, the promotion felt smaller than the job he'd lost. The title said everything he should have become, but it was stapled onto a history they hadn't even begun to fix. He didn't reply to the email. Instead, he packed a small bag and boarded the last train out of Penn Station. He hadn't been back to New Orleans in 13 years. The city had changed, but not the street his mother used to clean on. He walked past boarded homes and bright corner stores, past schoolyards filled with uneven laughter, past the old courthouse where he'd once stood trembling as they read charges that never fit. And then finally, to the one place he hadn't seen since the day he left it behind, the narrow one-room library, where he had first taught himself languages by reading children's dictionaries stacked beneath a leaking ceiling fan. The building was half closed now, converted into a community clinic. But the reading room remained untouched. Dusty, faded, still sacred. He walked through it slowly, touching the spines of forgotten books, whispering phrases he hadn't spoken in years. Arabic, Swahili, German, Cantonese, words he once clung to like oxygen. Words that had saved lives, even when they couldn't save him. A staff volunteer spotted him near the back. "You looking for something?" "No," he said quietly. "I think I found it." Back in Manhattan, the company scrambled. The public was still watching. The apology they'd promised needed a face. But Miles hadn't responded in 2 days. Behind closed doors, Elaine's departure was finalized quietly. No public reprimand, no statement of wrongdoing. Just an exit package and a confidentiality clause. She wouldn't speak again. But her fingerprints were still on every page of the company's past. Marla tried again. Another email. This time, more personal. "Mr. Carter, I can't pretend to understand what you've endured, but I do believe this company needs your voice. It's not a fix, but it's a start. Whatever your answer, thank you for forcing us to look harder at ourselves." It was the closest thing to honesty he'd received from anyone in power. On the third day, Miles returned to the city. He walked into the building through the front entrance for the first time ever. No badge, no side door. He was stopped at the front desk, but when they asked who he was there to see, he replied, "Myself." The receptionist blinked. He rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, past old security guards, who used to look past him, past executives who used to whisper as he mopped their footprints away. He stepped into Marla's office without knocking. She looked up. "You've read the offer," she said. "I have." And he placed a small notebook on her desk. The one he'd carried for over a decade. The one filled with dialects, idioms, prayers, curses, and peace offerings in 9 languages. He flipped it open to the first page, a quote from his mother. "When the world stops listening, speak anyway, even if it's just to yourself." Then he looked up. "I'll take the job," he said, "but I'm not coming here to fix what you broke." Marla nodded slowly. "Understood. I'm not here to help you save face." Also understood. "I'm here because there are kids out there right now who speak 3 languages and are being told they're stupid." He slid the notebook toward her. "And I want this printed in every employee packet. Day 1. If they won't hear me, they'll read me." She opened the notebook. Her lips parted slightly at the lines. Then she closed it. "We'll start printing tomorrow." Miles turned to leave. But Marla called out, "Why now? Why accept it at all?" He paused. Because the janitor wasn't the one who needed redemption. The next morning, news broke of his promotion. But it wasn't the company post that went viral. It was a student, a young black girl from the Bronx, who posted a picture of Miles from her high school language club. Her caption read, "He taught me how to say I am not ashamed in Swahili. Now he teaches the world. Congrats, Mr. Carter." The post hit 4 million views in a day. But as Miles read it sitting at his new desk overlooking the same skyline that once ignored him, Jasmine stepped in holding a manila envelope. "Elaine didn't stay quiet," she said. "Her lawyers are now claiming the offer to you was made under reputational duress. She wants it voided. Says it wasn't earned." Miles leaned back. "And the board?" Jasmine hesitated. "They've agreed to a hearing." Miles looked out the window. He was done being silent. He stood, picked up the notebook and said, "Then let's give them a lesson in what earned really looks like." But what neither of them knew was that Elaine had one last ally left, inside the building. Someone with the power to rewrite the rules before Miles could ever teach them. The air inside the Orleans Parish Detention Center hadn't changed. It still smelled of concrete sweat, metal rot, and institutional indifference. Even after all these years, the walls hummed with a quiet menace, the kind that buried you before the sentence did. Miles Carter stood just beyond the intake area, wearing a visitor's badge clipped to his lapel. The fluorescent lights above him buzzed, uneven and low. Every footstep echoed, and the echoes felt familiar, like ghosts of a younger version of himself walking these same corridors, shackled and stunned. He hadn't returned in over 2 decades, not since the night he was released at 19, with no apology, no transportation, no shoes, just a manila envelope of paperwork and the same streetlight he had seen from the back of a police cruiser. This time he came back by choice. He was invited to speak to a prison education program, one Jasmine had quietly helped him find after hearing him mention the facility in a passing breath. The group was small, a pilot, just 12 young men between 17 and 22. All black, all serving time, all born into zip codes where futures expired young. The program director, an older black woman named Ms. Raynell, met him at the door with tired eyes and a warm smile. "They don't know much about you," she said, as she led him through the corridors. "But they know you made it out." Miles nodded, his voice caught in his throat. "They also know you came back," she added. "That part matters more than you think." The classroom was a converted storage room, barely lit, with chipped paint and rows of fold-out chairs. But when Miles stepped in, the room stilled. The boys sat with shoulders tensed, posture guarded. They were used to speakers, preachers, lecturers, people who came in with good intentions and left with clean consciences. But Miles didn't stand at the podium. He sat in the same kind of chair they sat in. He looked at each of them, one by one, and began to speak, not in English, not at first. He opened in Yoruba. "Your spirit was strong before they ever gave you a number." Then switched to Haitian Creole. "You are not what they booked. You are what came before." Then Ibu. "They stole our voices, so we build new ones." The room shifted. Something uncoiled. One of the boys, the youngest, Tariq, leaned forward. "What language was that?" Miles smiled. "Yours, whether you know it yet or not." Tariq blinked. "You talking to us like we kings or something?" Miles didn't flinch. "Because that's who you were. Before anyone called you inmate." Silence. Then slowly, a few nodded. He told them his story. The scholarship, the arrest, the mugshot that traveled faster than truth. He described how the system was never designed to correct itself, only to survive, and how silence was once his strategy for survival, until he realized silence only served those who built the walls. "But I'm not here to lecture you," he said. "I'm here because when they locked me up in that cell right down the hall, I thought I lost everything." He paused, but I didn't. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the same notebook, the one he'd carried through mop buckets, lawsuits, boardrooms. He placed it on the desk. "This," he said, "is what they didn't take. Every language I ever learned, every phrase I could still speak, because they can chain your hands. But they can't touch what lives in your tongue." One of the boys, Malik, tilted his head. "You do all that now?" "I teach people who thought they'd never belong," Miles said, "in a place that once tried to bury me. Afterward, some stayed back." Tariq asked him how to say free in Yoruba. Malik wanted to know if he could learn Arabic in 6 months. Another boy, who hadn't said a word the whole session, whispered, "How'd you learn all that in a cell?" Miles smiled sadly. "The library cart. Same one that passed by this room." The room fell silent. He didn't need to say the rest. They knew. The only escape some of them ever had came on 4 rubber wheels and a broken hinge. That night, Miles stayed behind. Ms. Raynell let him walk the wing where he had once been kept. She didn't stop him when he asked to visit cell 3B17, the one that held him for 8 months, 3 weeks and 4 days. When the guard unlocked the door, Miles stepped inside slowly. The walls were still etched with names, gang codes, scratches of passing time, but in the far left corner, near the edge of the cot, his initials were still faintly visible, MC02, carved with a paperclip. He ran his hand over them. It was like touching an old scar, not healed, but not bleeding anymore. He sat on the cot, alone, and let himself remember, not just the injustice, but the waiting. The nights where he questioned if anyone would ever believe he didn't do what they said. The way his voice sounded when no one was listening. The weight of a future being siphoned away, hour by hour. But now he was here, not for closure, for clarity. Back in New York, Marla had prepared a press conference. A massive rollout of Miles' promotion, full public apology, diversity initiatives named after him, even a proposed foundation. Miles never replied to her emails. Instead, he drafted his own. A simple message: "Thank you for the offer, but my work begins elsewhere. I respectfully decline the promotion. You may keep the title. I'll take the purpose." He attached a new initiative, Languages of the Locked, a non-profit teaching incarcerated Black youth the global languages of their ancestors. Marla forwarded the email to the board with no comment. And within hours, news broke that Miles Carter had declined a multi-million-dollar settlement package to start a prison education initiative rooted in linguistic restoration. The story went viral, but this time, the headlines didn't call him janitor, fraud, or victim. They called him founder. Jasmine called that night. barely able to contain her breath. You really turned them down? I didn't need a desk, Miles said. I needed a direction. They offered you millions. I'm building something money can't buy. There was a pause. Then Jasmine said, softer. They're not done with you. I know. You've got a target now. I had one before, Miles replied. This time I'm just aiming back. 3 weeks later, Languages of the Locked launched its first class. 15 students, all incarcerated, all black, all branded early as broken. Miles stood in front of them with no slides, no suits, no degrees on the wall, just a voice and a sentence. What they took from you doesn't define what you give back. The students repeated it, then asked what it meant in Yoruba. He smiled. Let's find out together. But as he closed the door behind him, his phone vibrated again. A new message. Elaine is back. She's claiming you stole the nonprofit idea from an internal pitch. Lawsuit, incoming. Check your inbox. And Miles was about to learn that legacy costs more than justice. It costs protection from the very people who once called you disposable. Miles returned to New York quietly, carrying only his notebook, a suitcase, and resolve. He declined the company's offer, not because he was above their terms, but because he understood that to accept would bind him to their narrative all over again. He had already lived inside their frame. Now he would shape his own. Within a week, with Jasmine's help and funds from the settlement he retained, Voices Unheard was formally registered. The name felt right, a tribute to those who had been muted by systems, erased by suspicion, and presumed invisible. Its mission: bringing global languages to incarcerated black youth, connecting them to heritage, voice, possibility. They leased a modest storefront off Washington Heights, with a backroom classroom, glass front windows, walls painted sky blue, open, hopeful, resistant to silence. Word trickled in. The first class had just 10 students, in-system inmates, parolees, and one teenager on probation. The chairs were folding, the desks mismatched. But in that room something crackled. Miles stood at the front. No suit, no projection slides, just him, a dry erase board, and the names they all carried: Yoruba, Igbo, French, Arabic, Mandarin, Creole. He spoke a line in Yoruba: Yosim ni ni edami. My language is my identity. The eyes followed. These were young men whose identities had been confined to numbers, stairs, handcuffs. Now they heard a voice claim them. One young man, Dante, asked, "How we gonna learn French when I ain't even had a book in high school?" Miles smiled gently. "You have your mind. You have your ears. We'll start there." He pointed to a chalkboard where he had written bonjour and m'bote. Language means I can speak to more souls than the walls ever held me in. Within months, the program grew fast, whispered viral. High school students who had family in prison began tutoring remote modules. Volunteer linguists from universities signed up to mentor. Social media shared clips. A prisoner in Louisiana, translating Swahili rap lyrics. In Atlanta, a former youth offender reciting French poetry to his younger brother. In Chicago, a model UN club organized a Lang Night, inspired by the nonprofit. People saw not inmates but potential. The press caught on. Articles ran, from chains to tongues, how a janitor's vision rewrote Voices of the Locked. Interviews featured former students who said they used Arabic to talk to their grandmothers, Yoruba to pray, Hindi to decipher Bollywood lyrics. Some wrote, "My mother thought I was dumb. Now she asks me to speak to her in Igbo." The narrative shifted yet again. No longer was Miles fighting only to clear his name. He was building something that made his name matter. Donors showed up. Foundations offered grants. A major tech firm pledged laptops for distance learning in prison wings. The training programs expanded. A pilot in a women's correctional center teaching Swahili and Portuguese. Student numbers doubled. Videos of class recitations gathered views. Board members from nonprofits, education, criminal justice forums invited Miles to speak. His voice carried farther than any slide ever could. But as Voices Unheard grew, so did scrutiny. Not just from skeptics, but from those who had once sought to bury him. Between the applause, shadows moved. One day, Jasmine walked into the classroom for her volunteer shift. She frowned at a stack of printed documents on the back table. The heading read, "Tentative Funding Cut, Review Request, Voices Unheard from a Governmental Grant Office." She pulled Miles aside quietly in the hallway. "Did you authorize this?" she asked, voice low. Miles shook his head. I haven't touched that line in weeks. She frowned again. Someone's trying to pull the plug. Maybe even quietly redirect the funds elsewhere. Miles's stomach tightened. That was expected. They had tried to terminate his job. They had tried to destroy his reputation. Now they were trying to suffocate his purpose. That night, Jasmine dug through internal grant databases, nonprofit registries, funding flows. What she found shocked her: a shell nonprofit registered under Elaine Whitmore's name. Same city, same state, a nearly identical mission. Global Voices Initiative. The board members were names she recognized: 2 former Landsberg executives, a legal counsel, and a private equity associate. The address was a P.O. box. The contact phone number traced back to Elaine's PR firm. She confronted Miles the next morning. Elaine started a foundation copying you. She's chasing your donor pipeline. Miles closed his eyes. I expected lawsuits. I didn't expect her to try to outrun me with my own model. They called Nia Brandt. Nia said it was strategic sabotage. When your name becomes bigger than your nonprofit, rivals can weaponize competition to dismantle you. She's playing mimic and hoping donors won't see the difference. Voices Unheard held steady. But the battle was no longer only for hearts and minds. It was for viability, legitimacy, survival. Each time a donor asked for proof of operations, they'd see a competing foundation, with whisper of similarity. Each time a university partner hesitated, the copycat brand's Global Voices Initiative slid into proposals. Miles began traveling to cities where their programs were nascent: Detroit, Birmingham, Miami, holding town halls, speaking at prison reform forums. He insisted on transparency. He published full budgets. He released his class syllabi. He invited independent audits. He operated with radical openness, forcing scrutiny into daylight. In New Orleans, he returned again to the prison hallways, this time accompanied by cameras and press. Students recited poems, in French, Creole, Yoruba. A correctional official, surprised by the impact, asked to replicate the program. The photos circulated. The narrative expanded. A grassroots movement, not a corporate scheme. Then came the day when Voices Unheard got notice. A donor pulling funding because of concerns about duplicate entities. A large foundation said they might redirect their pledged amount to that mimic group instead. The email said, "We're prioritizing organizations that show stability." With 2 competing names, it's unclear how sustainable this is. Miles read it with trembling hands. He put his phone down. Jasmine turned off her laptop. Silence filled the room. Then, unexpectedly, the New York Times published a feature titled, "When the Copycat is the Accuser: How a Fortune 500 Executive is Bankrolling a Foundation to Drown Her Critic." The article laid out the shell nonprofit, the board members, the parroting of Voices Unheard's language, the suspicious overlaps. It quoted a corporate donor saying, "I was almost sold on a proposal they sent, until I realized it was a near-identical match to Mr. Carter's model." The journalist revealed that Elaine had used internal contacts at Landsberg to funnel donor leads toward Global Voices. Boardrooms shifted. Foundations froze. Media calls came. On the nonprofit's website, Miles posted nothing but one line: "They tried to erase me. Now they try to outlive me, but voices never expire." That night, as he returned to the classroom to speak a late session, he stepped up to the board, looked at young faces, cleared his throat. He began in Igbo. "Ojo Igwa, Mao Burunai Ibu Olu." It's not fear if you bear the voice. The room listened. Back in his apartment later, Jasmine knocked. She held 2 envelopes. One was a grant check for closing the budget gap. The other was a legal notice. Global Voices Initiative v. Voices Unheard. Demand for injunction, claiming intellectual property infringement, brand confusion, and request for immediate cessation of operations. Miles' eyes flicked between them. "One gives you oxygen," Jasmine said softly. "The other tries to strangle you." He exhaled, fists unclenching. "They can't have both," he said. And just when the world thought Elaine's fight was over, a verdict was being filed in secret that could steal everything he'd built. The courtroom smelled like old oak and gravity. The walls were paneled in dark wood. The gallery bench creaked under weighty expectations. Reporters lined the back, cameras circled. Across from the judge sat Elaine Whitmore, in a tailored suit so crisp it looked defensive. She looked smaller than she had in boardrooms. The edges of her power had sharpened into desperation. At a table beside her, her legal team leaned in, whispering. On the opposite side, Miles Carter, calm and resolved, sat beside Nia Brandt, his attorney, and Jasmine Vega, seated in an impossibly small witness seat, but very present. Elaine had tried to vanish. After her administrative leave, she claimed illness, then a personal retreat. The company had quietly negotiated her exit under a confidentiality clause. But now, she had re-emerged, not as a former executive, but as a plaintiff. Her claim that Miles had orchestrated a nationwide smear campaign against her. She demanded damages for emotional distress, defamation, reputational injury, alleging that his nonprofit and media narrative were a coordinated attempt to ruin her career. It was audacious. The judge called the case. The gallery quieted. Elaine's lead counsel stood. "My client," he began, voice measured, "has suffered serious harm. Her reputation has been dragged through public mud based on allegations that were never properly vetted. She seeks redress for what was, in fact, a carefully orchestrated media assault, one written by Miss Carter, distributed by Mr. Carter, and protected by his network." He gestured to the gallery. "We will show that these emails were selectively edited, that narratives were manipulated. We will show that Mr. Carter weaponized public sentiment to bully a powerless executive." He flipped to the first exhibit. It was the flash drive Jasmine had handed Miles in the boardroom, the one Elaine had tried to suppress. The judge raised an eyebrow. Nia Brandt rose to object. "Your Honor, we intend to introduce, not just that flash drive, but the full email chain, unredacted, including the line, 'We can't risk the optics of another black lawsuit. Get him out quietly.' We will show that Margaret Whitmore initiated a proactive cover-up, not a mere reaction to wrongdoing." Elaine's lawyer snapped. "Objection. Those emails are hearsay and were obtained illegally. No foundation." The judge drummed his gavel. "We will hear both sides. Mr. Carter, you may proceed with your evidence." Miles stood slowly. His voice was firm, but not loud. "This isn't about me. It's about what happens when a system believes its own story more than truth." He motioned to Jasmine and Nia, then turned to the jury. He introduced exhibit after exhibit: the internal audit logs, Jasmine's flagged reports, the whistleblower clause from the original company charter, testimonies from board members under immunity, and most of all, the email trail showing Elaine's strategy to neutralize him before PR could get wind. The courtroom read every slide. One exhibit made gasps resound: a deposition from a former Landsberg board member who broke under oath. He testified that Elaine had briefed him privately the night before the board meeting, saying, "If this escalates, tie it to criminal history." He then admitted he had not flagged it publicly to protect his own seat. Elaine's face drained. Her defense attorney whispered urgent asides. But Miles did not look at her. He looked forward. Then the unexpected twist: a newly submitted affidavit from Mallory Sharp, Elaine's former assistant. Under oath, Mallory swore she had drafted the internal PR statements under Elaine's direction. She confirmed the emails were authentic, unedited, and that Elaine had instructed her to disseminate selective narratives to shape public perception. She also submitted communications showing a plan to assign blame to Miles if external pressure mounted. The court murmured. Elaine's eyes darted. She tried to rise, but the judge quieted the commotion. Nia rose again. "Your Honor, with this admission from Mallory, the plaintiff's entire suit collapses under its own weight. We ask for immediate dismissal of all claims and consideration of a counterclaim for malicious litigation." Elaine's counsel tried to argue procedural errors, but their voices cracked. The judge called for recess. In the brief recess, whispers filled corridors. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. Elaine sat motionless, clutching a huddle of legal pads. Miles stood outside the courtroom doors under a shaft of light, breathing slow, steady. Jasmine leaned in, voice low. "We might win this entire case right now." Elaine halted. She leaned toward her counsel, speaking so quietly no one else could hear. But someone could. A shadow in the hallway. Jasmine's eyes flicked. Elaine's lips formed. "Then I'll make them regret it." The judge returned. He called the case back to order. After reviewing the new evidence and affidavits, "This court will adjourn briefly before ruling on summary judgment," he said. "I will issue a decision on whether this case proceeds to full trial." Elaine's defense counsel stood. "We reserve our rights to appeal the dismissal decision immediately." Miles sat quietly. Jasmine reached for his hand. He squeezed hers, but his eyes were forward. The gavel fell. The verdict wasn't just about Elaine's suit. It would determine whether a system built on silence could be stripped exposed entirely, or whether truth would remain another casualty in a courtroom full of power. The auditorium lights dimmed to a quiet hum, and the murmurs of anticipation drifted through the vast space. Banners reading United for Literacy and Equity Summit 20. The stage was wide, its backdrop a stylized map of the world in soft watercolors, overlaid with quotations about language, identity, and justice. A podium and microphone stood center stage, but no teleprompters, no giant screens flagged behind him, just a single spotlight. Miles Carter stepped into the glow. No notes. No teleprompter. He wore a simple dark blazer and jeans, not to conceal, but to show he belonged in every room equally. The camera pans captured him in full. The straight posture, the calm breathing, the eyes that carried both scars and stories. The live broadcast feed lit up thousands of screens, simultaneously as the house fell silent. He didn't begin with flourish. He waited, let the stillness press against the space. Then he started. I am Miles Carter. They called me a janitor. And I am one. But I'm also a teacher, a survivor, a son, and a man who speaks in 9 tongues, all saying the same thing. We belong. The words hung. The audience exhaled. He paused, letting the echo settle, then continued. They tried to silence me with rumors, lawsuits, smear campaigns, and threats. They told me that a man who carries more languages than names must be dangerous. But here I stand, not erased, but unbowed. Because language is not a weapon. Language is a bridge. To the past, to our ancestors, to one another. He shifted slightly, voice steady, eyes steady. When I taught those young men in prison, speaking to them in Yoruba, Igbo, French, German, Arabic, I wasn't giving them secrets, I was giving them their names back. At each language shift, the room shivered. Those who understood nodded, others felt the cadence. Some mouths parted. He didn't dwell long in translation. He just moved, sentence to sentence, weaving stories of invisible walls, and how words had always been a way to climb them. He spoke of the boardroom, of Elaine and her emails, of Jasmine's courage, of Nia's legal scaffolding. He spoke of how the system manipulated narratives, but how he refused narrative control over his identity. He spoke in English, then in Mandarin. Wamenshuijid. He spoke in Spanish, Nos pertenecemos aquí, then in Kiswahili, Sisi ni wakala na wasasa. The room stirred. The cameras lingered. This was not performance. This was reclamation. He didn't call out names or lawyers. He framed the struggle as collective. We say we belong, not because we seek to claim what's not ours, but because we refuse to let their stories define us. When we see those who were silenced, when we see the janitors, the cleaners, the mothers, the dreamers, we don't ask them to shrink. We ask the world to expand. By the time he reached his final words, the crowd was weeping, standing in ovation even before his last line landed. He leaned forward, voice tightening, not in weakness but raw clarity. We were never meant to fit their boxes, but we were always meant to change their world. And so I leave you this. If your silence costs someone their voice, then your voice is no longer optional. The hush fell again, heavier than the applause. The weight of it, a line that burned, not merely read, but felt, carried forward into conversations, into classrooms, into corridors of power. Then Miles stepped away, head high. But just as he turned, the camera shifted, catching a face in the back. Elaine Whitmore, seated in the 3rd row, expression tight, eyes hidden, lips pressed. She wasn't in the public section. She had found her way in. Behind her, a man from the board, stone-faced. They watched him leave the stage as the crowd surged toward him. The live broadcast cut to a wide shot. Sea of people, phones raised, tears, cheers, clapping, the world watching. Backstage, Jasmine embraced him. He leaned in, whispering, "We did this." Her voice cracked. "You did this." But as they walked toward the exit, a staffer whispered something in Jasmine's ear. She stiffened, and then she said to Miles, voice low, "They're filing injunction papers against the nonprofit right now." Miles froze, because her final line wasn't just a legal threat. It was a signal that the fight was far from over. The lobby of Landsbergen Row hummed with life, but also respect. The glass doors that once part opened for him like a ghost, now welcomed him with applause and recognition. Wide banners flanked the entrance. Voices of Equity Summit, keynote Miles Carter. The polished floors gleamed under new lights. The same walls he once swept now framed footsteps that mattered. He paused a moment at the lobby's heart, letting the shift land. He was not the janitor today. He was the one invited in. Jasmine met him at the foot of the escalator, eyes shining. She wore a sleek blazer, her badge reading CTO, voices unheard. Elaine's absence was noticeable. The wing of the building that once housed her corner office now bore a brass plaque, Miles Carter Global Linguistic Center. A subtle renaming, a bold claim. Jasmine squeezed his arm. "You ready?" she asked. He nodded, chest tight. They rode the elevator to the 42nd floor. He walked corridors he had once swept, now lined with portraits of students transforming lives, quotes about voice and language, glass display cases highlighting nonprofit milestones. Staff passed, greeting him with nods and respect. He remembered when he had passed them silently. Now the corridors whispered back. At the large auditorium where the summit was held, chairs were filled. Educators, activists, corporate leaders, former students. A podium stood at center stage, flanked by flags representing continents. On the wall behind him, a projected phrase, "When silence is broken, democracy grows." The crowd fell quiet as he ascended the stage. Jasmine sat in the front row, camera in hand, pride and expectancy in her eyes. He began without hesitation. "This building watched me disappear." His voice held the echo of distance. "But today it listens. Because the floor was never mine to clean. It was theirs to stand on." A murmur passed through the audience. He paused. "They thought I was background, but background builds the frame that holds the story." He scanned faces, eyes, tears, cameras, and continued. He recounted the years, the whispers in HR, the flash drives, Elaine's emails, Jasmine's courage, the nonprofit rise. He told them of the souls learning Yoruba in prison wings, reciting Arabic in classrooms where their ancestors were silenced, building bridges beyond their bars. He spoke of betrayal and endurance, of how language is not just communication, it is assertion. He did it in English, then in Mandarin, woman busicha moja, then Swahili, CCC Kimia. Each tongue landed like quiet fireworks across the room. He turned to the plaque bearing his name on Elaine's former office wing. She once thought this was a space safe only for her voice. Now it holds many. Applause rippled. He nodded, letting it ground him. He introduced Jasmine, inviting her forward. She spoke of systems, of tech bridging prison walls, of how she believed in truth, even when it frightened her. The crowd rose. The two embraced. He returned to the podium. Then he delivered his final line. Not a flourish, but a question cast like a stone. If you can silence someone for their skin, don't be surprised when you never hear the genius beneath it, though it was always speaking. Silence filled the room, then thunderous applause. People stood, tears in eyes, phones lifted, cheers rolling. The world was listening. But just as he stepped away, the projection flickered, and a hidden slide appeared for a split second before the AV operator killed it. The black screen that followed read, "Classified Carter Legacy, Board Review 2026. The audience murmured. Jasmine's face tightened. Miles froze. Behind the scenes, somewhere in that building, someone flicked a switch, because even in triumph, the question remained who would now decide whether his legacy would be protected or rewritten entirely. Some people are never heard, not because they have no voice, but because the world refuses to listen. Miles was one of them, until he refused to be erased. If this story made you think twice about how we judge others by their skin, their title, or their past, type yes. If you believe in justice, and subscribe if this broke your heart.